Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's conversation on the topic of resilience, living with resilience. We're going to talk about what that looks like and how we can develop resilience so we are happier, stronger human beings. Before we start, I like to connect with ourselves and with the spiritual world around us, so we can get inspiration and guidance to our conversation and discussion here today. So if you want to join me, I like to close my eyes and gather my thoughts. Take a deep breath and truly relax so we can be open to precious lessons that the spirits have brought us. Connecting with the spiritual mentors of the Paul and Stephen Spiritist Center, and to our personal spiritual mentor or guide, asking them for guidance and for inspiration. And more importantly, that we can apply everything that we learn here today to our daily lives. So be it. Thank you. Before I start, I'm going to share quickly the books that I'm going to be using as a reference. So one book is Heaven and Hell, which is one of the basic books of the Spiritist philosophy. It gives a different perspective on the idea that the spirits brought us about heaven and hell, which is quite different than traditional knowledge of what heaven and hell might be. And the other book I'm using is this one called Jesus, An Inspiration to Luminous Relationships. I'm not sure you'll be able to find a translated version into English yet. And in this book, it's chapter 35 that I'm going to be referring to. Another book that I'm using is called Vine of Light, by the higher spirit of Emmanuel, and the medium is called Chico Xavier, and it's lesson 146, where he talks about those who follow. That's the topic of the. So these are the books that I use as a reference if you want to explore a little more. So what is resilience after all? I'm going to read the formal definition. It's the ability to withstand adversity and bounce back from difficult life events. And researchers and even ourselves, we can ask, what is it that gives some people more capacity to quickly recover from challenges than others? And then there's a question that follows after that. Can we improve our resilience? And how do we do that? So researchers have been studying resilience, and more recently, even more focused. In 2014, Harvard Center on the Developing Child were studying adverse childhood events, so things that children go through and how that impacts on people's health and well-being. And through that study, they discovered that some children, despite having huge challenges that you would never think that they could bounce back from, they would have positive outcomes. They would become strong, resilient adults, whereas others going through maybe less challenging or similar, they wouldn't have that same outcome. And what they said and what they found about resilience was, and I'm going to quote this just to make sure that I'm saying exactly what they said. They said that one way to understand the development of resilience, that's Harvard Center on the Developing Child saying, not me, is to visualize a balance scale and thinking protective experiences and coping skills on one side, and then to counterbalance significant adversity on the other side. And people would think that it would kind of balance each other. They weren't sure if the more negative that meant that you wouldn't recover, it would pull you down, or the more positive experience would actually ground you, and that would be the essence of your being and not the negative. But what they found was something different, and I'm also going to read that one. They found that over time, the cumulative, and I'm quoting, the cumulative impact of positive life experience and coping skills it can shift the fulcrum that keeps the two balances here, making it easier to achieve positive outcomes. So if we think negative here, positive here, and the fulcrum in the middle, what happened is some positive experience would actually shift the fulcrum. So what happens is, even with less positive experience, that would be the driving force in the person's life. And I'm going to say the three things that they found that were the more important. The first one is related to children. So it might not be applicable to us, but it will be applicable if we have children in our lives. And what it says is, what they found was that the contributing factors, the greatest one for a child is having a positive adult-children relationship in their lives. And it might be with their parents, a caregiver, or even any person that they have a significant positive relationship, adult children. And that would build the coping skills and self-regulatory capacities that would make that shine, and that would tip the scale. They also found, and this can be applicable to us as well, not only children, that building a sense of self-efficacy and perceived control also helped tip the balance. It was very important. But what drew my attention was the third one, that mobilizing sources of faith and hope and other cultural traditions would also tip the scale. So those who had strong sources of faith, despite everything, that would contribute greatly, along with these other two that I just mentioned. And we're going to focus on that, because we're going to see that if we think only of the physical world, you might think that maybe only things linked to the physical world might influence, although Harvard said that that's not the case. Even building faith and hope, that helps us. But we're going to see that there's a broader picture when we think of spiritual life as well. So what is it? What is it that might transform somebody's life? We're going to look at a story that we find in Heaven and Hell. It's part 2, chapter 8. And it's about a man called Joseph Dimitri. And he was a blind man. So what happened was, he lived his life on earth. And after he passed, some of his friends who were participating in Kardec's group thought that it might be useful to call for him or evoke him and ask him questions, because he went through so much challenge. I'm gonna share with you. And they were curious to see, and he was a good person, like he never complained, how that influenced where he was or how his spirit was in the afterlife. And effectively, he came to tell his story. So he had belonged to a middle-class family, and he had good education, and his family had income, and everything was well and good. But at the age of 20, he lost his sight. But he was lucky enough to have this in place, so he wouldn't have to go through too harsh of a life, that being blind and also struggling financially. So he had that positive. But he had another thing that happened when he turned 40, around 40. He became deaf as well. So he couldn't see and he couldn't hear anything. So all his life was based on rely on the senses of touch. And that was particularly challenging, because one thing is losing your sight, but you can understand what's happening around us. But the other was losing also his hearing. And people noticed he never complained, like I said. He was always positive, and he passed around his 50s. So for 10 years, approximately, he lived with these two very, very challenging restrictions in his life. So they called him, and he was allowed to manifest through a medium. And what the story he told was, he said, "Oh, I understand that you guys want to see how I'm doing here, but you don't know that I was blind. I also had experience as a blind person in my previous life. However," he says, "he was a very talented man at the time, And he became blind when he was 30. And it was due to excess of all kinds. So he ruined basically his health and weakened all his organs. And because of that, he became blind. He didn't go into details. And he was fortunate as well to not have to beg for money. However, he got really mad at the divine providence and what was happening to him. Why was that happening to him? And he made life of other people around him very, very difficult. He was a very difficult person because he was constantly complaining and revolted and upset about everything, always questioning why me? And at some point in his life, he started considering taking his life, and eventually he did. So, because he thought that there was no point of living if he had all these challenges. And then he said that when he got to the other side, he started, after a long process, he started understanding that actually he was the one who caused that on himself because of the way he lived and that everything had a purpose. And there were spirits on the other side willing to help him. So he decided to incarnate again to this life where he was Joseph Major. And he was born, he said he was born with an inborn faith. And that's what we're going to discuss in the following. So when he was born, he had a different understanding. And like I said, in this lifetime, it went, although it was more challenging than the previous one, when he passed, he was in a much better situation than in the life that he took his life. So how do we develop that inner strength? How do we, like Joseph Matru, without having to go through every challenge he did, how can we now choose to develop that inner strength and prepare ourselves for maybe challenging times? How is that possible? So, like I said, Hermance Dufault, which is the spirit who brought this book about the inspiration of Jesus in luminous relationship. She says, and I quote, "Life suffering is greater when you feel guilt and don't treat yourself kindly. And because that leads to a corrosive," and she used that word, "sentiment of personal devalue." So she said that life might bring you suffering, but if that is linked to guilt, you will suffer much more than a regular person that might not feel that guilt. Because that leads you to not treat yourself kindly. And we're going to look into that, what that looks like and what that doesn't. And that, therefore, you have a sense of being lesser. You devalue yourself. Your self-esteem can go very, very low. And low self-esteem might show in one way that people are normally used to associating low self-esteem, which is a person being shy or quieter. But it can also be, low self-esteem can also be that person who's always trying to prove themselves, and they might be very aggressive, and they might be very successful, but they have that within them, which is linked to low self-esteem. And she continues saying, when you don't value yourself, you develop a profound feeling of discomfort, and you tend to want for changes to happen externally and not internally. Look how insightful, that when you don't value yourself, you have this feeling of discomfort, and then you tend to want changes to happen outside and not look that much inside because of that discomfort. You don't want to face that. And she continues saying, and you wish everything and everyone changes in order to feel better. So you're relying on people or circumstances changing for you to feel better. And that is the challenging bit, isn't it? When you're relying on external factors. And if we hop into what Emmanuel said, we'll come back to Hermance soon. Emmanuel on this page, Those Who Follow, he talks about two different types of people that have faith. We're thinking of people that have faith, who have some sort of philosophy or life philosophy that they follow and that they want to become good people. The ones that are fixated on the external, and it can be for a good cause. We're going to come back to that. So they're more concerned about external, and those who are focused on internal, on what's happening within and what can be changed in there. And he says that people focused on the internal, they don't develop what he calls an inner sufficiency. I'm quoting that because I found that word extremely interesting. Because inner sufficiency is inner strength or resilience, isn't it? But he used that inner sufficiency, like you're sufficient inside, and therefore you can deal with whatever is coming outside. And he was talking about people who have listened to spiritual teachings and who understand mentally and love that, and even come here, people like myself, and try to share what they learn. But sometimes that doesn't really translate into changing attitudes profoundly. And when that happens, you don't develop this inner strength. And when hardship comes, you don't know how to deal with that. You even start to blame even people who have an understanding of life and how the Creator is all love. We get upset, isn't it? When something really challenging comes our way, we start questioning why me? Why now? Why this? And all the whys that come with it. And we forgot to turn on our light while it's still day, our lamp while it's still day. So when night comes, you have that light with you. And that is the teaching that we find in many spiritual philosophies or beliefs, and that the Christ brought us. He is the one who said that to light up your candle, it's the candle, he said candle, light up the candle while it's still day, because it's harder when it's night to light up a candle. So Emmanuel says that we have to learn with our mental abilities, understand what is being said, find it beautiful or not find it beautiful. But more importantly, we have to put that into practice, that we have to live. And that's why the title is Those Who Follow. Because some people actually follow the spiritual teachings by putting that into practice in their daily lives. And those who just like it or talk about it. And that's where we have to be careful. That the Christ, as many other spiritual leaders that came into this planet, they came to model behavior. And in coaching, there's something called modeling, where you get someone in your profession or where you really like the result that they have, and then you study in detail what they did. And if you do the same thing that they did, you'll have probably the same outcomes. So we can apply that to the Christ, modeling what the Christ said. And Emmanuel said that people, even for a good cause, they might think that it is by talking to people about what's good for them that they'll transform people. And Imansi Dufo, going back to her, when she talks about us trying to look at external or fix external, she said that sometimes that is a good cause, because she said that it's so grave, this disconnect where we focus solely on the guilt unconsciously. We don't know that we're probably doing that, but we're focusing on punishing ourselves. That leads us to believe that karma is and I'm going to quote this, karma is a persistent task of transforming others. So some people say, oh, I have this understanding. I know that we have to transform, but I can see my partner, my daughter, my mom, my brother, my friend, they need my help so they can transform. And she said that that's the big mistake. And I'm going to quote this because I found this incredibly, incredibly insightful for all of us who truly, with all our hearts, believe in transforming and trying to apply the teachings into our lives, but there's still little bits and pieces that we can learn. And this is what I learned with Irmãs, that our karma has to do with us. And I'm going to quote, your karma has to do with you, not with other, or what, not with others. It has to be with you. And look what she says, because until that, we understand that our karma has to do with us and doesn't have to do with other necessarily, that our karma isn't fixing others, it's fixing us. But she says this, discover what you have to learn with those who pass through our lives. If we discover what we have to learn with that other person, then we will incorporate in that we will transform. Because imagine, and some people, and I can see myself in that role sometimes, we're like, oh my God, it's my karma, this person in my life that I have to put up with them, and this and this and that. Can you imagine a higher spirit saying something like that? Can you imagine Jesus or Buddha or whoever came to this planet, Krishna, as a spiritual leader saying, oh my God, I have to put up with humanity, so difficult, these people that I have to put up with. No, they come from a different heart space. And we're learning that. And the beauty of Irmãs before, she always says you have to do that with kindness towards yourself, because we are developing ourselves as human beings, isn't it? So yeah. And we can find these teachings in what Jesus brought. So I'm going to quote you. We can find this in Matthew. Let me see if I can find it here because it's easier. We can find this in Matthew, in Mark 9:50, and also in Matthew 5:13, where Jesus is talking about salt and how we are the salt of the earth. And I'm going to read the two, and then we're going to map that across with what Irmãs teaches us. So in Mark, it says, salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can you make it salty again? And then that's Jesus saying, right? Have salt among yourselves and be at peace with each other. And Matthew captured that as well, where he says, you are the salt of the earth. That's where Jesus was talking about salt and light, how we are salt and how we are the light of the world. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. So how does that link with what Irmãs Dufour said here in this lesson? That we can be salty with ourselves. Like we have to find the spice within ourselves. If we lose that by devaluing ourselves, so we're losing our saltiness, then look what he says. It's no longer good for anything. People have a perception that we don't have value because we have all that guilt and all that sense of not being worthy. And once we do that, we ourselves trample under us, like on ourselves, and we let others do the same. However, if we look at Mark, just to complement on what Matthew said here, he says, have salt among yourselves. So you discover that saltiness or that spice or that within yourself, develop that and be at peace with each other. So in our relations with the other, we're not going to be demanding things that has nothing to do with us having to demand that or trying to fix people. We can help. And Irmãs Dufour says that. Just to be careful that when we say it's not our karma, because it really isn't our karma to fix someone, but it is an opportunity for us to help another human being. We can, if the person wants to be helped, because if they don't, then that it's not us insisting It's us offering that possibility of assistance when they want, which is what the spiritual guides and mentors do with us. They're here constantly, more than we know it, assisting us. And they're offering constantly their help. If we don't want their help, they're on standby there waiting for when we want them. Not literally on standby right next to us, because we know that they might be in a place very distant from us, but they can still assist us mentally, isn't it? So we finalize, because I think it's already time, we finalize with recapping everything that we went through. So what is resilience? Why is it that some factors might influence in spirituality or sourcing, understanding, having more faith and more hope is a protective factor and helps develop resilience? Knowing that through our challenges, we will develop and we will grow, but the task that we're here to do is to really look at our karma is transforming ourselves, is making ourselves the best we can without using guilt as internal punishment, which for me, that is a challenge, guys. That is a challenge, not to put that much pressure on you, put the right amount of pressure, I'll say that, to keep ourselves accountable and responsible for the things that we do and the consequences, but not punishing ourselves internally, so we can actually grow and develop, okay, and build resilience. So the resilience person, let me see if there was anything else that I forgot. Yes, so if we put that all together using what science says, what the spirits say, is that if we mobilize our faith and our sources of faith and hope, and we do that by following following the role models or the spiritual models and incorporating their teachings into our daily lives, but doing that with love and learning and discovering what we have to learn with all those who pass through our lives, not thinking of them as karma, but understanding that there's a lesson there to be learned. And then we'll have true resilience that will withstand incarnations like Joseph Dimitri did in heaven and hell. Once he truly learned in the spiritual world and he started putting that into practice and he was born again, he could withstand becoming blind at 20, becoming deaf at or hearing impaired at the age of 40. And he lived a life that he came out successful, in the sense of he managed to go through all that and develop himself. And that's what I just wish for all of you. And we'll finish now. Thank you everyone for listening. For those who got to this point, I hope that truly influences in some way what the spirits brought in these beautiful teachings from Emmanuel Hamansi and the spirits that helped Kardec, that these teachings can help you improve your lives. Okay, so we're just going to thank the higher spirits, and we're going to vibrate much love to all those who are in this journey like us, learning how to grow, learning how to become better humans. May we have a wonderful week, and may we be like a point of light and hope with everyone that we are in touch with. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.